Are you looking to improve your engine's performance? Can you improve your cylinder head performance without damage? And can a socket really be a porting tool?
From here and here so that the air has less restriction and get more air out and into the combustion chamber. The simple, quickest, easiest way, socket that's the proper diameter that we've figured out here and which one you're going to use, and you just cutting and cutting until you can get that socket to fit through. And people do it this way. And welcome back to part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, I suggest you go back here and click on this link and watch it. So there was a lot of juicy stuff that we covered in part 1 that you might want to watch before you watch this video. Have watched it on your way back? Let's begin. Woohoo! We finally get to use our die grinder! Not just yet. When I started this video, I said I was going to tell you one of the most important theories / rules that you'll ever need to know when you start porting a head. Every time you put this in your hand and you turn it on, you need to say this to yourself. The porter is king, but the queen rules the house. What does that mean? The porter is always trying to open up the smallest area in the port to make it flow more air. But if you make it flow, if the air speed gets too high, the turbulence will ruin everything that you've been trying to accomplish by getting more air out of there. The queen rules the house. The queen rules the port. Airspeed rules over everything. If you get too large of a hole and you get too much volume and have no airspeed, you piss her off again. Now this is probably a little deep for your first porting, but you should remember this. As you open that hole up, you are creating more air and you're increasing the speed in which the air travels through that port. And when it gets too high of a speed, it gets turbulent and the air bounces around all over the place, and you don't gain the flow from the hole that you just increased. Bigger is always better until you piss the queen off. Remember that. Okay, let's go over these 3 basic things and then we'll get more in depth to them. Another term that we haven't talked about is bore wall. The bore wall on the intake valve, this is your cylinder wall, this is your piston, this is your cylinder head on top of your block. This intake valve opens against this side or this bore wall, just like the exhaust opens up against this side or this side of the bore wall. The exhaust bore wall and your intake bore wall. This is your this is your push rod pinch. This is your port coming in. For the example right now, the black circle is the bowl area, which is below the seat, and the throat, which is what we're working on. When you look down through here, here's your bore wall, and that valve is opening up against this bore wall. On this side, it's opening up into the middle of the bore. That's something you need to keep in mind when you start porting. Now, your basic porting, what we're going to do is we're going to open up this throat. So we're going to remove material from here and here so that the air has less restriction. The air can pick up more speed and get more air out and into the combustion chamber. The simple, quickest, easiest way is to remove the valve, of course, and then find a socket that's the proper diameter that we've figured out here and which one you're going to use, and you just keep cutting and cutting until you can get that socket to fit through. And people do it this way. And it will work in a stock port where the air velocity hasn't gotten up too much. But if you tried to do this to a high flowing head, you would absolutely destroy it. Now let me explain.
Just because it'll work doesn't mean it'll make the same power as doing it right.
Use this and just cut straight down through there. So now you have your seat, and then we're just going to whack it off like that. What's going to happen? At slow speeds, it'll still be able to come up, make that sharp turn, go straight up, make another sharp turn and come out the valve and go into the combustion chamber, and it won't have any problem. But as you make this bigger, which means you're having a bigger cross-sectional area, you're having more room for the air to get out, it's going to pick up speed. And when it does pick up speed, it no longer will make this corner and make it up to here. It will literally come up here, and it'll bounce off of here, and it'll bounce off of here. It'll come up here, bounce off of here, bounce off the valve, bounce down here. All of that is turbulence, and now the air that's trying to get out the valve is having a very hard time because it's bouncing across air that's shooting from one side of the port to the other, and the air's coming and hitting that, which slows how much air you can get out here. Remember what I just said? You just pissed the queen off, and she rules the house. So we don't want to do that. We're talking about, well, let's see if I can do this. So let's get rid of this. And if you look inside your port, you'll see what I'm talking about, and we will go out there and I will show it to you again. But you have air coming in like this. Well, maybe let's use the example here. So your air comes in, it's coming down the port, comes around the push rod pinch or the long wall, comes around, goes into the bowl, and then it has to turn and then come up and out. So when it does that here, it comes through the port, turns, comes up and out, and goes right into the center of the bore wall. There's no restriction at all there. On the other side, the air comes in, comes around, comes up out of the valve, and should go straight down the bore wall. This is where you got to pay attention, because a nice smooth radius is what we're always after. The air will stay to a slow turning turn and stick to it and not jump off. But if you take and make this radius on this side, well, now you're turning the air straight into the bore wall. You're pushing it straight over and it's hitting the wall. So it's coming out and hitting the wall instead of trying to go down the bore. We already know this has got a restricted area and you get less air out this corner. But if you make the port shape so that it's rounded, it's just going to turn and hit this wall. You can't get any flow out. Once again, you start to create turbulence and it slows down the flow. So when the example of taking a socket and sticking it in there and boring it straight down through, it actually kind of is what you do on this side, because you don't take and radius, the air comes through here and kind of just comes straight out and into the bore. So using a socket and just boring straight down through there without any taper is almost what you're going to do on the bore wall side, whether it's on the intake or the exhaust, or I should do it here, the intake or the exhaust bore wall side. That side, the bowl needs to come out with very little radius. Now, I guess I didn't really show you this, but basically this red mark, this is your bowl, the black mark is your bowl. The red mark here is what we did. We went in and we checked it here, we checked it here, we checked it here, and we checked it here. Figured out all our numbers and came out with 1.55. But it's not 1.55 in a circle. The bore, or the throat, is actually almost square. And it doesn't look like it when you look down inside there, but when you start to look a little closer, you realize that that's kind of a truth. And also notice that the throat is not center with the bowl, and it's also not center with the seat. The throat is offset to the seat, and there's a reason why, and the factory's done this. This is already that way. You're just going to enhance it. So on the common wall, the long wall, whatever you want to call it, the straight wall, the air is going to come down, make a slight radius, and come straight out and go down the bore. That's how you need to shape that side. This is your short side radius. When you are shaping your throat, short side radius, the air comes in, has to make a really short turn and come out. If you take this, which is the exit of the short side radius, and you try to round it out so it's shaped more like the seat, you'll lose power. So I say we don't touch the short side radius. If you mess with that, and this is very, very, very sensitive, you start touching this thing and don't know what you're doing, you'll wreck your port faster than anywhere else in the port. If you don't know what you're doing, don't mess with this. And it's your first cylinder head. You don't know what you're doing. Leave this alone. I've said it 100 times, and I'll say it 100 more. The short side radius was designed for that port. It is shaped perfectly for that port, and it doesn't need to be modified. Not at this state. Anyways, do not try to round that short side radius and make it round. Keep it flat so it has all the area it needs to come out, and it's designed to come out without creating turbulence. On this side, the air's coming in, it comes down into the bowl, comes out, comes up through the throat and out and into the bore. So you need a nice smooth radius, and you want to smooth that as much as you can and make it as pretty as you can so that it's smooth all the way out of the valve and going into the bore. So the roof is coming out here and comes out of the bore here. You can shape this to fit more of the contour, but do not start digging this out. If you do, you will find water. Don't get crazy. Now, I'm not talking about the seat area. I'm not talking about the throat area. I'm talking about the bowl area. Down further. You do not want to take and open this up. If you take and open the bowl up here so the air has that nice swoop and coming out, you're defeating your purpose, because you're now making the air come like this, go underneath the seat, then back out, then around the seat and into the bore. That's your bowl. That's down in there. If you hog out this bowl, you've just wasted space, and once again you're going to create turbulence. Make it nice and smooth all the way out. Once again, I'll show you all this again on the cylinder head before we start on it. Just like I was saying before, you take and use a socket, bore right straight down through there. The reason I say it'll work is because when you bore straight down through there on the short side, you've pretty much done exactly what you need to do. The bowl on the pushrod pinch side rolls in like this. On the short side, it's more like this. So when you go and put a socket down there and you just bore it out to the diameter of the socket, you've made this side, the bore wall side, almost the shape you need it to be. Where on this side, you've destroyed it and you're creating turbulence. When the air is not at a high speed through there, you can get away with it, but it's going to bite you in the butt eventually.
AKA, you can make more power if you leave the socket alone.
Don't do it this way. So now I need to go out, get some light inside that port, make all this make more sense. But you really kind of need this visual before I went out and started poking this into the port. And you don't want to make it perfectly round. That's the point I'm trying to make across. We're almost ready to start die grinding, but not quite yet. So you can see this is the cylinder head. I put on this acrylic tube. You can look down in there and see how the combustion chamber looks through the cylinder bore. We haven't talked much about valve shrouding, and with a 188 valve and a 360 head, I haven't got a whole lot of valve shrouding until you get to about 500 lift. At that point, you're starting to get valve shroud. I put this cylinder on here so that you could see what it looks like, or what the valves looks like seeing the cylinder wall. This acrylic tube represents your cylinder bore. And like I was talking about before, when we were talking about squish, you can see it's just a teeny tiny bit right there that when the piston comes down, it can hit there and push fuel in. But there's not much squish. A little teeny bit there, a little teeny bit right there. But it's mostly in an open chamber, you just don't have it. And this is what it looks like when you put a 202 valve in it, when you put a 340 valve in it. Shrouded all the way around. I can get it in there. Get in there. Can't get it there. All the way to there. And that's not 500 lift. That's 500 lift. Now you can't get it anywhere. So you can see you haven't got much room to open it up and get less shrouding because you're right up against the bore. So with the bigger valve, it creates bigger problems. Yes, you can get a lot more air out this side. The air is coming along the long wall, and it comes around up and wants to go straight out. On the pushrod pinch wall, it comes in, wraps around, and then comes up and out. They can go right out into the middle of the bore wall. But here, you can open this up a little bit, but you don't want to make a big bowl here. You don't want to cut it all the way in here. You don't want to cut up and make a big bowl and gouge this all out, because then the air comes out, has to go in to the bowl area, then back out, up around the throat, through the seat, and now it's turning the air and wanting to hit the wall, hitting the cylinder wall. You don't want to do that. You want it to come straight out. Here, if you make a radius so it turns, it just turns and goes right into the center of the bore. Make sense? Here, we're going to make that air shoot straight up with the slightest beveling right there and out. And the same thing here. It's going to come up straight with the slightest beveling and straight out. Okay, so remember what we was talking about, and I said you don't want to take and round the short side. You want to keep the cut straight. You don't want to round it off. Well, so now you can kind of see what I'm talking about. This is your short side. And it comes up. And that is your 30 degree or 60 degree cut right there. You don't want to take this short side and round it to there. It makes perfect sense that you should, but it's not a good idea. You want to keep that short side the way it is and leave that little piece right there. Don't sit there and grind on this and round it off to match this. It doesn't help the flow of the short side. Leave it there. Just starting to rough it in. Core shifts the floor to the short side and over. I haven't touched. There's just a basic idea of 30 minutes of roughing it in. You've heard the word core shift, right? This manifold that they put together. And that groove you see right there is the two different pieces. And you can tell how much core shift you got just by looking at them. If you can take this and you can catch on it, it's got quite a bit. And this has quite a bit. What does that mean? It means if you were doing a heavy porting on this, you're probably going to find water. You're probably going to poke through a coolant passage before you get what you want done. For us, it's no big deal. We'll have tons of metal left when we're all done. But just a little FYI. When you're porting, that finger will see more things than your eye will ever see. You will constantly have your finger in there filling, finding where the imperfections is or where it needs a little bit more of attention, and you'll constantly be filling, going, grind on the spot, go fill it again. Now, as far, like I told you, the push rod pinch is not your problem, and you can see where I just lightly ground on that just to get a burr out of the way. You can see further down in there, heading towards the short side, where I just touched it up a little bit because there was a burr there. There's a burr up on the roof that I had to get rid of, and I just kind of touched up that casting flaw where the core is shifted, and then touched it up a little bit more there. That's as far as I'm going on the intake port on this side. I'll probably take a sandpaper roll and go through the whole thing, which will make it look like I ported everything, but I didn't. Is the bulge for your head bolt, and it's on both sides. That head bolt protrudes down into both ports, but it isn't a problem. As you can see, the die grinder hasn't even touched it. It's still dirty. It makes no difference for us at all. Okay, all it needs now is a guide cut in it, and then a valve job done, and then just slightly touch it up after that. Push rod pinch 1.607. I redid the measurements. .57. So we went from 1.55 to 1.57. Needs a guide or guides, and then a valve job, 3-angle valve job, and then after that's done, go in and just touch it up after the 3-angle valve job's done. And that port's ready to go. Okay, let's talk about the 4 sides. We talked about the common wall and how we want it to come straight out and then just slightly curve in so that it will come straight down the bore. As you can see, pretty straight. Things don't change much until right there. There's a teeny bit of the 60, 45, and then out. So it can come out and go down the bore. And then on the push rod pinch side, you see it comes around, you see it comes up, so it goes up and then radiuses in, over, across the seat, and then on out. It isn't that straight shot through like we got here. This is your common wall, this is your push rod pinch wall. You want to take and radius that as best you can all the way out. And then when I get my 3-angle valve job cut into here, then I'll touch it up a little bit here. Okay, and then the floor or the roof where it comes off and into the bowl comes on up and out on both sides. This area right here is where I said you don't want to cut the bowl out deep or you'll find water, and it's also a wasted motion. If it come like this and then went underneath the seat and then come around and then back up and out, that was a wasted motion. You can see right there that I ground that little burr, little notch off, and I shortened up the guide all the way around here, and then I'll flip it over. Okay, there is our short side. There's a short side radius. As you can see, it's tough to make it look good on camera when you're playing with the ports because there's so much shiny and so much dull. It's hard to see, but you can see where I didn't touch that short side radius. I left that little bump we were talking about. You can see the short side radius there. And the only other thing that I did, and that's in the combustion chamber area here, there's just a little teeny bit right here that I straightened out and smoothed out. Now all it needs is a lot of machine work. Well, there you have it. Your port is complete, or you're just about to get the die grinder out and start porting by the specs I've just shown you. If you've never used a die grinder, go around and clean all the burrs and trash on the outside of the head just to get a handle of control of the die grinder before you start getting crazy with it. And get your hand to feel exactly how much tension it takes, how light, because it really is. With a burr, you want as light a touch as you can, and when you start playing on the outside of it, you can put a big old gouge in there and who cares, you know? You get inside the port, it can make you really mad really fast. So take die grinder and just clean the outside of the port. Just play around with it for a while before you start to port it. We haven't talked about the exhaust, and we're not going to on this video. I will give you a few tips. The exhaust doesn't need any porting. Go in there and clean it up. If you want to go polish it and make it pretty as hell, by all means, have fun. But the exhaust port, you want to have a good radius exhaust seat put on it. Just a regular 3-angle valve job will work just fine. But a nice radius one, if you've got a machine shop willing to do that for you, will help. It'll allow it to flow better. The exhaust is all about airspeed, and if you open it up, you lose airspeed. But there's little teeny tricks and stuff on the exhaust port too to make it flow better. But for your first head porting job, just go in there and clean the burrs out of it. Leave the floor alone. It's too low already. It doesn't need any attention. Anything you do cutting on the floor is going to make it flow worse. Leave the floor alone. The other thing I need to say is that these modifications will apply whether it's a big block, whether it's a small block, whether it's a Ford or a Chevy. As long as it's what's called a wedge 2-valve head. Obviously these specs don't apply to a Hemi because it's a completely different design. It doesn't apply to the Chevy big block where it has a canted exhaust intake and exhaust valves. So these set like this. In a big block Chevy, they set like this. In a Hemi, they set like this. So it doesn't apply to the Hemi or it doesn't apply to the big block Chevy. But anything that's a 2-valve, it looks like this, all these things apply and work. What else? If you really want a more in-depth discussion on the exhaust valve, I could make another video on that, but simple rules for this head leave the floor alone. Polish it to your heart's content if that's what you want to do, but it's not necessary. But polishing will help a little bit. Get rid of any burrs that are in the way, and just look at it for a smooth entrance from the exhaust valve out into the header, into the exhaust manifold, whatever that may be. Don't open up the opening where it goes out into the header. Just leave all that alone. I hope this was informative and you got a lot out of it. You know, the basic porting, not going to take you that long for as simple as what we've done. And I know we spent, this is video number 2, explaining it all in just a short thing of porting. But you need to have that knowledge so that when you go to cut it, you cut it in the right places and not the wrong. I hope this helps you out. I hope you have lots of fun porting. And if not, I hope that you learn something from it, even if you say, I'll never port another cylinder head in my life. Because some of you will say that, and some of you will get a big kick out of it. And that's why I do it. I'm not a professional porter by any means. I'm just a backyards guy. I mean, that's why my site's called Beer Budget Performing Mopars. It's doing stuff on a beer budget, and this is one of them. You just go in there and use a little elbow grease and clean it all up and make it perform better and save yourself from having to spend thousands of dollars on another cylinder head. Watch it a few times if you need to. Gather up some tools, let the metal fly. Another thing you might want to think about is a shop vac sitting on one end or the other while you're grinding. It'll suck up a lot more of the metal. You won't have as much metal scattered all over the place, because when you start grinding, especially since you've never ground before on a cylinder head, by the time you get done grinding on it, you'll have metal shavings scattered everywhere. So if you have a vacuum, as you're grinding, they'll just go right into the vacuum. And like I said before, there's nothing better than a little bit of air. These are well worth buying. Just some computer spray air will go a long, long ways, especially if you don't have compressed air. Like and subscribe if you got value from this. Until my next one.